Hey everyone, welcome back to Small Batch Devs. My name is Austin.
And I'm Elliot. Today we're looking at the Firebase Stripe Subscription Extension.
Before we do that, just real quick, we need to plug that we started a podcast. It's Small Batch Devs, and it's probably on your podcast app of your choice. So if that's something that interests you, we're talking about more like personal topics while also drinking whiskey, which we said we're going to do on this YouTube channel and we never did, but we are doing it on the podcast. So go check us out there if you want some entertainment, hopefully in a podcast form.
If you find today's video helpful, don't forget to leave the video a like and hit the subscribe button. But without further ado, let's get into it.
Recently, Firebase has added some plugins in which we can use a Stripe plugin in Firebase. So that's what we're covering today. If you want to kind of take a step back and learn the beginning of Stripe in a more traditional way of integrating with Stripe, you can check out that other video right up here. And there are some steps in that video that you'll need in order to complete the content of today's video. So you might want to just check it out anyways as a refresher.
So moving right along, what is this Firebase Stripe extension? Well, it's the fastest way to get started with handling subscriptions and payments in your Firebase web application.
So since it's a Firebase extension, Firebase will go ahead and set up and manage a lot of the backend for you.
All you have to do is configure some starting points and the extension does the rest. Then we'll drop in a little bit of client code to bring it all together.
So you'll want to use the Firebase Stripe extension if you want to incorporate and set up subscription payments in your web application, but don't want to take all the time to learn Stripe's API or set up your own cloud functions.
Another great reason to use this extension is that Stripe developed it. It's already using their best practices and it's maintained by their team as Stripe and Firebase evolve.
So how does it work, you may be asking yourself? Well, to start off, it connects to Cloud Firestore, your Firebase authentication, and it also sets up a few cloud functions for you.
This extension is going to use Cloud Firestore to save customer data like which subscription they have.
Firebase Auth is utilized so that if a user signs up, it actually can trigger a cloud function to create a customer account through Stripe.
And some of the other cloud functions that are created will handle creating Stripe checkout sessions, updating subscription data for your customers, as well as deleting any of your users if they are deleted from Firebase. It'll also delete them from your Stripe database.
One thing you do need to keep in mind though is you will need to be on the Firebase Blaze plan, and also Stripe does take a portion of your subscription payments.
So today we're going to be using the Firebase console to install this extension, but you can use the Firebase CLI to do it as well.
Later in this tutorial, you'll need a Stripe account and a hosted terms of service and privacy policy before you can finish the Stripe customer portal setup. But the good news is there's a number of different services that you can use to generate these documents, and you can host them on Firebase.
So enough chit chat, let's start walking through these configurations. So we're here on the Firebase extensions page, and if we just scroll down to the bottom, you can see run subscription payments with Stripe. That's the one we're going to be installing. And if you hit learn more, it'll tell you how the extension works, as well as some of the resources created and what you'll be charged for, if you're charged at all, going past the free tier of the Blaze plan.
So before we jump into installing the extension, we're just going to take a quick moment to talk about Stripe. If you're unfamiliar with Stripe, Stripe is a third-party payment service that manages your users' credit card information, their subscriptions to your services, their purchase history, and a lot more.
So just like you have a database in Firestore, when you go into the Stripe dashboard, it will also have a database of all your customers, your products, your invoices, and any other payment-related data.
And the reason we mention this is because of the next few steps where we actually install the plugin or extension. Some of the options are going to be configured in the Firebase database as well as the Stripe database.
So we're now going to finally click the install button. The first thing you'll need to do is, if you have multiple Firebase projects, you'll have to select which project you want to install the extension on. Now it's going to tell you about all the things it's going to create and ask for permission to do so. So we're just going to hit next. This is a billing warning that says if you go past the free tier of Firebase, that it will charge you because you're on the Blaze plan. We're going to give Stripe access to 2 of our Firebase services, which include the authentication and the cloud data store. And this is just so that it can communicate between our Firebase authentication so that it can create new Stripe users, as well as store customer and subscription data in our databases. And now on to the configuration.
So under the configure extension portion of this form, the first thing we have to do is choose a deployment location. And you'll typically just want to leave this by the default, whatever is already chosen for you. The next field is for the product's Firestore location. And this is just where Stripe will actually save some information in your database about your different subscription plans.
The customer Firestore location is where Stripe will save information on a per customer basis, like their specific subscriptions, those subscription IDs, and things like that. What's cool here is that if you already have a user collection where you used your Firebase auth user UIDs as the keys in that collection, you can just give that location to Stripe and it will merge in the subscription data and Stripe data with your existing user documents.
The next field is asking us if we want to sync new users to Stripe customers and Cloud Firestore. And this is basically asking if we want to create a Stripe customer whenever a new user is created in our Firestore, or if we want to wait until that user actually tries to check out and make a transaction to then add them as a Stripe customer.
So we're going to suggest to use sync no matter what, because if you've got other Stripe code in your client, such as single purchases or any other type of payment processing, you'll be able to utilize the customer that's created immediately for these situations. So we suggest using sync no matter what. It provides the most flexibility.
And now we need our Stripe API key with restricted access to our Firebase account. So let's head over to Stripe and do that. So as we mentioned earlier in this video, this would be a good point to maybe pause and go watch our other Stripe video, because you obviously need to have a Stripe account set up. We already have one, and we kind of walk through how to do that. So you might want to go just check that out. But if you already have a Stripe account set up, the next step here is to go to the developer API keys. So we're going to do that. And we're going to create a new restricted key here. So we're going to give our key a name. We're just going to call it Firebase Subscription Extension Key, but you can call it whatever you want. And we need to give it a few different rights here. We're going to give it write access for customer. We're going to give it write access for checkout sessions. We're going to give it write access for customer portal. And also that's it. That's the 3 that we need to give write access for. And we also need to give read access for subscription tier. Now that we have all the rights set up for our key, we're just going to hit create key at the bottom here and we'll have our key.
So one thing to note on this screen is that you do have a secret key, and we just want to be thorough and let you know that you should never share this secret key with anyone. Unless they're on your development team, of course. And if you are publishing your project to GitHub as a public repository, you're going to want to make sure to take that secret key out of your code before you publish it, because this is basically the keys to your Stripe kingdom here. So if you're wondering where or how to treat this secret key, you can use the Firebase configs to set a config that's hosted on Firebase that will just reference a property and auto replace that property with this key. So go ahead and dive into that if you are planning on posting this to a public Git repository.
Maybe we'll make a video on that soon. Who knows? We might need to.
We probably will.
And of course, the last step, so we don't forget, you'll of course want to copy your newly created restricted key and head back over to your Firebase. configuration for the extension and paste in your API key.
So we're going to skip the last config as we can only set this up once the extension is installed to our Firebase project. So we're going to go ahead and hit install extension and wait a few minutes as it processes and sets everything up for us.
So once the extension is finished installing, we can just go ahead and click on the Get Started button. So obviously there's a lot of information on this page letting you know exactly how to use this extension. So you got to read it word for word or watch this tutorial and we'll tell you how to use a very small portion of it. But if you need something more in depth with Stripe, then you can read all of it. But for now, we'll keep it simple.
So we're going to keep going with setting up this extension as there's a few loose ends we need to tie up. First, we're going to update our security rules, and luckily all that code is laid out for us right here under the Set Your Cloud Firestore Security Rules section. It's pretty aptly named. So we're just going to copy everything in between the match database documents all the way down. There you go. And then we're going to paste that into our Firebase security rules. Firestore security rules. So we've just updated our security rules with the recommended settings from that extension, and now we're going to hop back over to the documentation.
Next, we need to hop back into the Stripe dashboard and set up a webhook to talk between our cloud functions and our Stripe API.
So now that we're back in our Stripe dashboard, we're going to add that webhook. So to get to the webhook section, you're going to go to developers on the left and then webhooks under that. And we're just going to hit add endpoint. Now Stripe, if we go back to the documentation, will give us the URL of that endpoint that it's set up for us. So go ahead and copy this and then paste that in as the endpoint URL. Next, we need to select the events to send with this webhook. And you can see in the documentation, we're also told which events that we need to add. So let's go ahead and add those. So once you're done creating that endpoint, go ahead and copy your webhook secret key, and we're going to paste that back in our extension configuration. You're going to click Configure Extension in the top right over here, and then scroll all the way down, and right where it says Fill in Form Post Installed, that's where you're going to paste in that webhook secret key. After you do that, go ahead and click Save in the top right, and it's going to take a few more minutes to reconfigure and rebuild this extension.
So once your webhook is set up in the previous step, we can now set up a subscription or a product in Stripe. So we're here on the Stripe dashboard again, and we're on products, and we're just going to add a new product for our subscription. So if we hit the add product button, let's give it a name. It can be whatever you want it to be. And if we scroll down, we're going to give it a price, and it's going to be the good price of $4.20. Of course, it's going to be recurring, and it's also going to be monthly. So now we can go ahead and save our product, our good product. And now we're going to go ahead and just copy our price ID down here because we're going to need this in the upcoming steps. So now if we hop back over to Firebase and we head to the Cloud Firestore section, you can see that we now have another little product here, and that is our new SBD product good subscription.
So the next thing we need to do is set up our branding and settings for our customer checkout session as well as our customer portal. So back in the Stripe dashboard, we're going to go under settings, and then we're going to click on the customer portal settings. And that's going to bring you to this screen where you can configure how your customer portal acts. And your customer portal is just where your user can manage their credit card number, their subscription data, if they want to cancel or change subscriptions. So the only settings we're going to change is if you scroll down to the bottom, we're going to enable cancel subscriptions, promo codes, and payment methods right here. And we already have these turned on because we tested this earlier, obviously. We're also going to enable the update subscriptions here and the prorate subscription updates. Now, before you can save this, you will have to enter a terms of service and a privacy policy URL. So go ahead and enter those in, as well as a default redirect link. Now, the default redirect link is going to come into play when your user is done with their checkout session or their portal session. When they are redirected to the Stripe checkout session or portal session, they're going to do their business. And then when they're done, they're going to go back to your website, and that URL that they're sent to is defined right here. And so we just have our generic homepage. And then once you're done, you can go ahead and hit save, and your checkout session is now set up. So one more thing you can do in the Stripe dashboard is set up how your customer portal and checkout session look appearance-wise. And you can do that through this branding setting right here in the settings menu of the Stripe dashboard. So if you click on that, you can change your icon, your logo, and your colors that are associated. And you can see previews of how this will look with the checkout session and customer portal. One last thing you'll need to do on the customer portal settings page is actually add the product that you want your users to be able to select to this added products and products section right here. So that's going to wrap up all of the Firebase console and Stripe dashboard setup that we need to do. Thanks for bearing with us. Now we actually need to add a little bit of client code to our Angular application so that our users can actually access these subscription and portal pages.
Now it's finally time to code some Stripe functionality into our app. If you have not yet installed the Stripe npm package in your application, then you can run npm install @stripe/stripe-js. I'll be right here. Something to keep in mind while developing this is that your user has to be signed in before they can see any of this functionality. And that's because, as we mentioned early in the episode, a user has to be created in Firestore, and that will also create the Stripe user account. So they'll obviously need that Stripe account before they can actually do anything with this Stripe functionality. So something we've gone ahead and done on our homepage is add a button. And this button is dependent on if your user is signed in for one, and if your user is signed in but not subscribed yet, it will have a donate $4.20 button. And if your user is signed in and does have a subscription, then we'll have a manage account button.
So each of these buttons performs a different action. The subscribe monthly is going to call our send to checkout method, which is going to send our user to their specific checkout session to purchase a subscription, while the manage account button is going to send the user to their customer portal so that they can manage their Stripe related information. So if we jump into the send to checkout code, you can see we're doing a lot in this method. So let's just break it down. First, we're going to obviously need the customer UID from the Firebase authentication. We're using an authentication service that gives us this, but you can use just standard Firebase SDK code to get the Firestore user UID. Once you have that UID, we're going to call the user's collection and then sub-document into that specific user, and then sub-collection into their checkout sessions. We're going to write an object that has the price ID as well as the success URL and the cancel URL to that collection location in Firestore. This price ID is the ID we told you to copy earlier from your subscription product. The success and cancel URLs are where your user will be sent depending on whether or not they successfully complete the payment or if they cancel out of it. Once we write to that Firestore location, a Firestore cloud function will be triggered that will generate a checkout session ID, which will then write that ID back to that Firestore document location. And we're now waiting on updates from that location. Once we have that session ID, we can use the Stripe.js library to then redirect the user to their checkout session by passing in that session ID. Before you can use this redirect to checkout method, you'll need to initialize Stripe. This is where you're going to put your public key from your Stripe dashboard API keys settings menu. Once your user is sent to the checkout screen, they can then make a purchase of your subscription, which will then trigger the Stripe webhook that we updated earlier, which will trigger one of the cloud functions that the extension set up for us. And it's going to write the subscription information to this user's location in Firestore. So it's going to store the fact that they have a subscription and that subscription's information in Firestore. And that's how we can tell whether we need to show the buy subscription or manage account button on our homepage.
So now we're going to talk about the send to customer portal method. And as Elliot mentioned earlier, this is when your user already has a subscription and wants to manage their account through Stripe. So what this is going to do is this is going to call off to a cloud function that we have that the extension set up for us, and after it calls that, it's going to return a bit of information in this data object. And basically we're just going to use that data object's URL field to then redirect them to this URL that Stripe created for your customer to manage their account. Okay, it is finally time to demo. Well, kind of. We kind of goofed a little bit earlier when we were configuring the extension. We mentioned that we want sync, but we did not turn on sync, which we just found out. So you need to turn on sync. We also did not update our customer details. We left it as customer, but we were actually using users in our database. So if you are using users, then you'll need to update that. We did not. We are sorry. We forgot. We done goofed. But once you update those, everything should be good, and it is finally demo time. So if we take a look at our app, so if we go ahead and log in with our Small Batch Devs user, we should have triggered all that functionality of the creation of the accounts. And now we're going to go ahead and click the donate button. One thing to keep in mind, we don't have any spinner, so we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but this does take a few seconds to actually load the Stripe page. So yeah, if you have a spinner here, that would be a good implementation and a good UI UX experience, but we do not.
So now we're in our Stripe checkout session, which means that we can test this functionality. So as you can see, we are in test mode, which is something that you had to set up back in the Stripe dashboard. There's a toggle on the left-hand side where you can switch to test mode and create all of these webhooks and products in test mode. Now we're in test mode, and there is a test card that you can use to test payments, and it's just 42 all the way down. And then the month and year is just a future date, so we can do 01/23, and then the CVC is any 3-digit number. Name on the card can be anything, and your zip code is just a 6-digit number. And then now we can hit subscribe. So now Stripe's processing that payment with that test card. We'll get back a successful payment, and then we'll be redirected back to our homepage. There we go, and now we're redirected, and now you can see our Manage Account button has appeared instead of our Purchase Subscription button.
And just to quickly demo the Manage Account button, if we click on this and wait a few seconds, and there we go. It looks very similar to the checkout page, same styles and everything, and you can update anything that you want to update here through Stripe.
So start making some money.
Money, money, money. Thank you very much for watching this video. We definitely hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you did, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'm pretty sure, oh, we have a podcast. It's the Small Batch Devs podcast. We hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.
Peace.